Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shield slaves, service peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And let's see, where are we going today? Oh yeah, back to the good old USA. And I want to talk about this Trump discussing taking another look at our relationship with NATO. And of course, we get the usual shitstorm every time he suggests something, even though it may already have quite a history. And this is another example of that. Trump came out and said on TV interview, quote, frankly, they have to put up more money. We are paying disproportionately. It's too much, and frankly, it's a different world now, unquote. And then he clarifies that he's talking about decreasing U.S. spending and contribution financially, and not its role. And he made that very clear. And yet, all these people are starting to act like he's a non-interventionist or even an isolationist, and it's not really the case. So of course the media has attacked him. The Hillary Clinton campaign has attacked him for showing weakness and not wanting to stand up to the Russian threat. But as Trump has shown, he doesn't see the Russian threat the same way, and I happen to share his worldview. I don't see a Russian threat in spite of the propaganda campaign, and he realizes this, and he's just pointing out that after all these years, these countries that are so rich, like Japan and Germany, should be paying for their own defensive needs and paying more contribution to NATO. And of course, a lot of these countries, like Japan and Germany, they have the economic miracle after the destruction of both those countries in World War II. But of course, when you have no military expenditures, it's a lot easier to have an economic miracle. And so these states, like particularly in Europe and Germany, they've transferred this wealth into large welfare programs and not militaries. Although a lot of these countries do have large militaries. Japan does have a fairly large military, as does Germany. But the amounts that the U.S. Contributes to NATO vary from year to year, and it seems to fluctuate somewhere in the 20 to 30 to 40 percent area. I'm sure somebody can point out the exact figures, but the major contributors, Germany, France, the UK, and the U.S., carry the bulk of the costs, and has a hierarchy in which the U.S. is at the top. So it's pretty simple math that Trump just wants to re-examine that and perhaps funnel that money back into the United States, as he says. But there's a lot of the thing that I'm most interested in is not only is it exciting to have at least him re-examine our participation in NATO and what NATO's mission is, etc., and how it's used, but also just the fact that all the status quo and the media are all jumping on Trump as if this is some sort of crazy new idea. So I was surprised when I did some research to find out that this goes back many years, at least a decade or more. You can go all the way back to 2003 when Rumsfeld said that NATO needed to transform its military, much the way the U.S. was doing, and contribute more money and more forces to U.S. adventures overseas. And then you get into 2011, U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates criticized the U.S. involvement with NATO, said our disproportionate funding by the U.S., especially in light of cuts in Europe, and the inability of the allies to contribute to combat operations. So this is a long-running argument, and in fact, in June 2011, the amount of money that European countries were spending on their militaries was $45 billion less in 2 years. So you can see why that scares people in the United States and certainly in the military-industrial complex. So of course they're going to have this sort of alarm, and then it continues. In April of 2012, there's articles about a huge NATO spending gap, the U.S. carrying the bulk of the weight. I'll attach all these articles below as usual, of course. And then in 2013, October 2013, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel complained of exactly the same problems that Defense Secretary Robert Gates talked about 2 years before that, and was calling for a, quote, rebalance, unquote. Then in Washington Post, June 2014, there's an article about the U.S. chiding the Europeans on the lack of their contributions to NATO. In February of 2015, there's an article, U.S. and Estonia are the only two NATO members meeting their spending requirements for being part of NATO, and that's 2% military spending, 2% of GDP military spending requirement. The U.S. and Estonia were the only two that met it a year ago. And then just as recently as March 2015, there was an article in the Pittsburgh Gazette, once again talking about European cuts and why the U.S. has to pay more and more for its inclusion in NATO. And so anyway, the whole idea that Trump is on some new trajectory when he's basically echoing the stance of the last two administrations, going back well over 10 years, once again, demonizing Trump for something that they're already interested in. And one of the things that's really good timing about this is that there's also the story the last 2 years about the fact that they're building a giant new NATO headquarters building in Brussels. So they can't afford to keep their militaries. They can't afford to contribute more, but they can build a shiny new giant NATO complex in Brussels. And it keeps getting pushed off a little bit. It's supposedly going to be built this year. But one of the things that's predictable about it is when they first started the project, they projected that it would be 460 million euros, and then it quickly rose to 750 million euros by last year. And then the leaked report came out and said the true cost of this building is going to be 1.3 billion euros. So there you go. I think Trump's on to something when we can, once again, the bureaucracy and the governments can spend all this money, particularly in Europe when they're all broke right now, 1.3 billion euros on a new NATO building. So, hey, let's put that on the list. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.